and the director of the Institute of Economic Research and of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Dr. Armando Sanchez-Vargas. Welcome. We are really pleased that this prestigious event is taking place under the auspices of the Ambassador of the Republic of Poland to Mexico, who sends his best regards and regrets not being able to be here today, but is looking forward to participating in the next seminar on the 19th of January. I would also like to welcome Professor Isalia Nava and Professor Musiałkowska, who came up with the idea of organizing this series of seminars and are coordinating the whole project. Without them, it would not be possible to organize it. Thank you. I cannot forget about professors from other institutions who are here with us today. Welcome, as well as both the Mexican and Polish students following the event on Zoom and YouTube. Now I would like to ask His Magnificence, Rector of the Poznan University of Economics and Business, Professor Musiałkowski, to open the series of seminars.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Musiałkowska. Buenos dias in Mexico, good afternoon or good evening in Poland. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you. I'd like to thank all the organizers. I am really delighted that this event has been jointly organized by the three institutions, the Embassy of Poland in Mexico. Thank you to His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, the Institute of Economic Research of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, as well as our university, Poznan University of Economics and Business, Institute of International Business and Economics. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the people involved in organizing this event. On our side, it is Mrs. Professor Ida Musiałkowska. Thank you very much. The pandemic is global, and I'm really happy that we will talk about the impact of the effects of the pandemic in a global perspective on the two continents, and also about the reactions to the pandemic from international organizations on both continents. So I'm really looking forward to a very interesting seminar, interesting presentations, and interesting discussions, and I really hope that this is just a start, a beginning of a series of events and a close cooperation between our institutions. We are very much interested in developing such cooperation. So once again, welcome, and I wish us all a very interesting evening in Poland, or a seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I would like to ask Dr. Armando Sanchez-Vargas, the Director of the Institute of Economic Research of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, to say a few words. Doctor?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Dr. Leonardo Lomelí Vanegas and the University of Mexico, we are glad to have you here. And we are really happy to have this series of seminars that have started when the first time Sofia invited us to the Embassy of Poland, and we start discussing the possibilities to have joint activities not only about conferences, but also the possibilities of looking for funding and start doing joint research. And in this case, with the Poznan University, we are glad to have Maciej, the director of the university, and all the students and professors. I'm very sure that this will be the start of future work, research work, and possibilities for all of us. I would like to thank to Isalia Nava and to Sofia and Michal for organizing this meeting, and all the people that is attending these presentations. Thank you very much, and let's have a nice start of these activities.
Thank you. I consider this event officially open, but before I ask Professor Tadeusz Kowalski to take over, I would like to emphasize his role as a great macroeconomist, the editor-in-chief of the Economic and Business Review, as well as the founder and the director of the Poznan Atlanta MBA program. Just to mention one technical thing, the seminar will be recorded. That's it from my side. Thank you, and Professor, over to you. Professor, your microphone is muted.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the possibility to facilitate this debate. The debate is to be devoted to the reaction of the COVID-19 pandemic by international organizations. And we have two speakers, Professor Ida Musiałkowska and Professor Alberto Moritz Cruz. Let me briefly introduce both speakers. Professor Musiałkowska works at our university. She obtained her PhD and a postdoctoral degree at our university. She was a visiting professor in a number of European and American institutions. Right now, she's head of the Department of European Studies. She's also program director for international economics at our university. Her current research interests are centered along dynamics of regional integration and development processes in the EU and globally. She is also interested in EU cohesion policy, Latin America, and policy transfer, which is a topic which used to be a topic of her recent book. Professor Moritz Cruz has got his PhD from University of Manchester, and he received earlier his master degree in economics at Mexico National University. Right now, he is with Institute of Economic Research, and his fields of interests are macroeconomics and development economics. He recently has focused his attention on the impact of trade and financial liberalization on growth and development. He is also editor of the Problemas del Desarrollo, Revista Latinoamericana de Economía. So we have two researchers, two speakers who will organize our debate. Each of you will have no more than 15 up to 17 minutes. But before you start, let me ask you to focus your attention, Ida, on how the EU reacted to the cross-border crisis with its own framework, where these actions were within or outside the EU competences. This is an important distinguishing element. And have we learned any lessons from the previous financial crisis in terms of the scope and speed of reaction? And Professor Moritz Cruz, could you describe in your presentation, in general terms, what has been the economic response in Latin America to the pandemic? And secondly, what kind of lessons could be learned from these actions? Was it a strategy, a consistent strategy, or just reactions triggered by evolving pandemic? So let me give the floor first to Ida. You have 15 up to 17 minutes, and then Professor Moritz Cruz will follow. After the presentations, we will launch debate based on the presentations. Ida, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning for Mexican audience. I'm very happy that I can participate in this first event that we co-organized together with La UNAM and with the Embassy of Poland in Mexico. And I'd like to mention who made this possible, and this is Dr. Michał Paryś from the Embassy of Poland, and I'd like also to thank you to Zofia Musiałkowska for support. Now I'd like to move to my presentation, already introduced by Professor Tadeusz Kowalski. I try to reflect on the questions that you posed at the beginning, but what I'd like also to do is just to give some overview of the activities and actions of the European Union mainly, with respect to current pandemic that we are all facing worldwide. So let me share my screen with you on my presentation. Okay, so the topic is just response to the pandemic, instruments, mechanisms, and possible implication that I think that we can leave for the debate. And I would like to concentrate on coordinative approach by the EU with regard to the pandemic, to the crisis. Then I'm going to describe some of the instruments used against COVID-19 and talk about the future or the current development that we see in the EU. As you probably know, the latest forecasts done by the European Commission predict that we probably have the deepest recession since the crisis from the 30s of the 20th century. And what is predicted that for this and for the next year, we have a contraction of the economy. So probably we will come back to the normal, if it's normal, in 1 or 2 years, if nothing more unexpected happens. So this is the first slide I wanted to show you. The second one shows also another dimension, territorial dimension. It's not only the countries that suffer the effects of the pandemic in terms of the economic aspect of it. It's a reaction in the regions at subnational level. So we see that many regions will face the challenges related to loss of jobs or closure of different manufacturing or other economic sectors. So we see that we have a variety of sectors that can be at risk when we look from this regional perspective as well. This slide goes from the OECD report, also from last month. So first of all, when we know that the situation is really a difficult one, I'd like to comment on the reactions of the European Union. Firstly, the EU seemed to be a bit slow in reacting, and it was criticized by many member states, so for example, Italy. But later on, when we saw the outbreak in Europe, the member states started to act, and this time the reaction was faster than in the case of the financial crisis that started in 2007. And we saw some concrete proposals formed in March 2020 by the heads of states of 27 countries that belong to the European Union, were four specific priorities for strategy, response strategy were formulated. The first one related to limitation of the spread of the virus. So it's related to cooperation across the borders. The countries were expected to somehow coordinate the actions in order to respond to that. I mean, closing or opening the external borders. The second issue that was not the case in the EU was ensuring the provision of medical equipment. So this is something that was new to the activities of the Union. because it was important, and almost in every country we suffered shortcomings and lack of necessary equipment. So it was the reaction to that. Then we have another priority is just support to researchers to find a vaccine. Now we see that there are many announcements popping up that we have at least some solutions found, but in March it was the priority just to speed up with the research in such an important area, which is healthcare and trials to fight the pandemic. And then also it was help to the member states to overcome social and economic impact of the COVID-19. And as I mentioned before, you seem to play a more coordinative role, and it somehow complements the national and subnational reactions to the pandemic. I would like also to stress that the most active are right now the local and regional levels, of course, within the strands set up by the countries and also the EU. But the regional and local authorities know the most about the current situation. So we see that there is a lot of institutions that cooperate together under the concept that we call multi-level governance in the EU. And what kind of instruments were predicted just to go with a fight? So it was one of the novel instruments that was proposed, and it's called Rescue. And it aimed at delivering medical equipment, such as all the equipments for hospitals, masks, etc., etc. So it was something new that came from the first priority I mentioned before. Then within the existing instruments, the EU decided to mobilize research under the EU research program that is called Horizon 2020. And it has started to found several research programs and supported research teams across Europe just to help them to find the medicine and vaccine for COVID-19. So we saw the allocation moving towards this kind of focused or concentrated priority. Then we see also another instrument predicted for future, and I will talk about it in the last part of my presentation, that is called Recovery Fund, and it's predicted for the forthcoming years, 2021, 2027. And this is unusual aid that we would have of the value of 750 billion euro, which is divided into grants and loans to the member states. So this is something that we have for the first time ever at this scale in Europe. Coming back to the existing instruments, I'd like also to mention something that is called cohesion policy. Usually we have the funds under the cohesion policy that support the economic development and sort of convergence in terms of economic, social, and territorial development, but because it's focused at regional level, we see that the authorities can use it for the development policies. And in order to help fight with COVID, also part of cohesion policy was somehow mobilized to find some solutions within the situation and the pandemic. And the EU adopted two kind of packages. One is CRII, what's the first initiative based on existing instruments, and the future one based on the future budget. And we see that we have the flexibility with the use of existing instruments. This is nothing new. It's not new money put to the governments, to the member states, but the existing instruments that can be spent in a more flexible way. And it allowed to transfer unallocated funding between different regions, different categories of spending. So it made possible to react to the pandemic in the three areas: healthcare, business, and support to people. And the future one is called REACT EU, and is a part of this new recovery fund for future financial perspective in the European Union. And the cohesion policy instruments were first spent on healthcare just to secure protective equipment, testing, and support hospitals by purchasing additional medical equipment. Then it was somehow offered to businesses just to provide working capital for mainly SMEs, but also for large companies as well. Also for digitalization and setting up new financial instruments. And the third component is support to people, and it aimed at employment retention and supporting vulnerable groups. And we see that it was done very quickly by regional authorities and also national programs in the European Union, in the countries. We see the values in here. So we see that this is quite impressive what the member states did. And also, we see that it was possible to use the EU funding without national co-financing, which is usually the rule. So we see the change of the rule of spending the cohesion policy money. And what we also observed that, first of all, we have set of categories to be a subject of co-financing. So in the healthcare is mainly this what I mentioned before, which is protective equipment, which is medical equipment purchase, and grants for R&D into COVID. So this is the first main three categories that we saw the flow of money to. The second one shows us the shifts between support to businesses, and we see several countries that are the leaders, which is Italy, which is Poland, which is Greece, and when we look at these slides, but at the same time we see the decrease of spending on previously predicted and programmed investments. So we see shifts in the investment, mainly money were moved to working capital, and for keeping liquidity in existing, for example, R&D investment and projects, instead of having new ones. So this is something that we see on this picture. And again, we see the categories. So we have productive investment and existing research and innovation enterprises that we had. So these are main categories for change and for flows of money within the cohesion policy. And support to people, mainly social services, retention of employment, and support to vulnerable groups and others. So again, these are main categories for cohesion policy being used as an instrument to fight with COVID-19. Then we also observe another new instrument that was introduced by the Union, and it was just to mitigate unemployment risks. And this instrument is based mainly on loans and guarantees given to the member states, and the member states should activate short-time work schemes just to keep the employment at least at the current level for some time. But this leads us to a risk. For future risk, which is increase in public spending. We see that this is a consequence of the crisis. But again, if we see this kind of instruments used, we have to be aware that this will be a future problem for Europe and not only for Europe. So this is just like a question how to design economic policies in the future. And here we have the division between the countries of this new mechanism. For Poland, for example, it's almost 11 billion euro to be used. And what else the EU predicted in terms of financial instruments? It's support, for example, of the European central banks to keep the monetary stimulus. We have this recovery fund I mentioned before. We have also other instruments. So this is just like a set of different instruments to be designed to fight with the pandemic. And what is quite striking that we see on the example of current budgetary negotiations that we are just following now. First of all, what we see, the shift of priorities, it may come from the pandemic as well, but it's somehow reactions to what we observe in the current war. So first of all, we see that one of the main topics will be dealing with the climate change, and we see this Green Europe deal, European Green Deal, as we name it. Then we have additional instrument designed only for fighting the effects of the crisis. This is this recovery fund that has its own name, Next Generation EU. So for the first time, we have just like a massive amount of money from the EU level to normal activities, as we call normal under multi-annual financial framework, and we have this recovery fund that is dedicated only for fighting the effects or mitigating the effects of the pandemic. And what we see as the main category, this is one of these lines in here, this is like agreement from November, that the majority of funding goes to cohesion, resilience, and values. This is the largest part of the budget. Then we have issues related to natural resources and environment. And then we have single market innovation and other categories in here that are typical for the budget. But those three, I would say, are the most important. And the recovery fund somehow gives additional money to those categories that are within the budget in usual years.
Ida, could you be closer to conclusion?
Yes, yes, because I'm at my last slide. This is just like coming to the final words. So what we can observe, so like with the question mark, if we can say that it's a sort of deepening of integration, because within this new mechanism, we see new approach to have new own resources. We have a new approach to loans. So we can pose ourselves a question, is it just like a new fiscal dimension of your economic integration? Or not, but this is something that clearly pops up after analyzing the picture. The second issue is shift of priorities, something that was not usually in the hands of the Union, it was health. And in here we have new program, new initiative that is called EU for Health. And of course, this is more coordinative role of the Union. This is still within the competences of the EU. However, we see that with this trans-border problems, we have to react at the upper level, at the subnational level, just to have some kind of instruments or possibilities just to go with. And this is reflected in budgetary negotiations and this priorities for the new fund. And the last issue will be the economic results of the pandemic that we still don't know what the future will bring us. So I would just say that we see like a speed up in integration in some of the areas that the union acted so far, and then we have a lot of challenges to be faced further on. However, we see that the crisis can bring some changes into the integration processes as well. So thank you very much for listening to the presentation, and I'm just giving the floor to other speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, and let me give the floor now to Professor Moritz Cruz. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning in Mexico, and evening, morning in Europe. First, I would like to thank or congratulate the organizers here in Mexico and in the Poland Embassy and Europe. Finally, thanks to Professor Tadeusz for the kind presentation and for the questions. Try to work on them. Well, if you allow me, let me try to share my screen. Well, the economic response of Latin America to the COVID crisis has been, well, some sort of similar to around the world, because there is no alternatives. I mean, you only have as a policymakers 2 options basically, and these options are the use of fiscal policy and the use of monetary policy. So the response in Latin America has been quite different in the sense that to Europe, in the sense that each country has to make their own effort to provide the resources to try to help peoples and enterprises and so on. So this is a graph that shows how much the countries in Latin America, or some countries in Latin America has spent as a percentage of GDP. No? And as we can see, the country that has spent more money, well, this data is to May or this year, is Peru, and with 9% of GDP, and followed by Brazil, Paraguay, Chile. And Mexico is the country that has spent a little bit less, no, or considerably less, only a 1% of GDP. So this shows that countries have reacted different to the economic crisis. And this depends on the ideas of each government and their capabilities. I will talk about this later, but this is the first idea that shows, well, the data shows that anyway, there has been an effort on the political, and the fiscal side to, to put the money in the economy to try to recover. So nevertheless, countries have spent differently according to their capacities. If one looks what have been the instruments, we can see that this has been uniform. These instruments have trying to be uniform in the sense that, they haven't. The money has been spent to support basically, as I mentioned, people and small and medium enterprise. In fiscal terms, the packages that we have seen in Latin America have been based on relocating and increasing public spending, and on reducing, postponing, and accepting tax payments. And of course, there has been cash transfers. This has been the main instruments that have been put forward in on the fiscal side in each country. And in monetary terms, what we have seen is efforts to provide liquidity to the financial system. Central banks have tried to reduce the interest rate. Not necessarily this has have an effect on commercial interest rates, but the central bank has reduced the interest rate. And there have been efforts also to provide special credit lines and to renegotiate the maturity of public and private debts. These efforts are important because usually economic crises are always dealt by the fiscal policy. So in this special case, we have seen both monetary and fiscal efforts to support the economy. Also, there has been a massive effort to support or enforce social programs. So this is the equivalent to say that there has been lots of money to cash transfers, no, or programs to employ people. So overall, no, what we have seen is that in Latin America, the fiscal stimulus has been small, nevertheless, about 2.4% of GDP. And this is very, very small compared with the other countries or other regions in the world. But if we compare with the rich ones, no, they have spent around 6.7% of GDP in fiscal stimulus. Nevertheless, this there's a small quantity of money that the region has spent compared with other regions. It is expected that this next year it will recover and grow to around 3.5% according to the International Monetary Fund projections. Also, thanks to these measures, fiscal and monetary measures, but also because we have seen that the exports have recovered somehow. So because obviously recovery has worked in other countries like in Europe and like in the United States, and also because other countries have important countries engines of growth have recovered very quickly, like China. China is very important for Latin American countries in the south. So what are the relevant lessons that we can learn from this crisis? Well, as I mentioned, the fiscal spending has been small, but this is due to the structural problem that Latin American economies face, and this is the lack of fiscal revenues. As you might know, in Mexico, in Latin America, fiscal revenue represent around 18% of GDP. This is half of what rich countries tax which is about 35% of GDP. So it is vital for these countries to increase public revenues. If this crisis, when any kind of crisis, want to be faced successfully, not only obviously for crisis, it's important to have sound public revenues, but also to other issues, to face other issues. So this is a major implication of the crisis, I believe. Countries in Latin America need to increase public revenues. So I think this is one of the lessons that can be learned. The other one is that crisis can be also solved focusing on people and not just on financial institutions. Like in the past, Latin America has been hit by several crises in the 1980s, and the solution has been always to support the financial institutions and forget about people. well, this crisis shows that the government also can support people and small and medium enterprise to overcome the crisis, So I think this is an interesting lesson that we can learn from the crisis. Also, I believe that the crisis, any kind of crisis, can be dealt better when an economy depends to a lesser extent on the tradable sector. That is to say that when the engines of growth are to focus on the domestic market, well, globalization has some benefits, but globalization has also some risk, major risks. So if the commercial partners collapse, well, your markets, your foreign markets will collapse also, and therefore your exports. And if export are your main source of income, then you will face several problems. So I believe that these strategies of export-led growth are in somehow very risky. The lesson we can learn is that countries need to focus more on the domestic market. I insist, this is to say that the engines of growth needs to be focused on the domestic market. So we can reduce the exposure to collapse in outside or in the foreign markets. Finally, but not less important, is that perhaps the best way is to detach from the neoliberal agenda, because what we have seen is that this agenda suggests that everything needs to be privatized. And one of the things that we can learn is that if the government doesn't invest in crucial services like health, then we will face major problems when this kind of crisis emerge. So this is not only obviously for health, but think about water or other utilities or important services that the government should provide. If we continue to believe that market solves all the problems, then we will face real issues in the future, and we will be very have very problematic agendas. So the recommendation is that we in Latin America, we need to detach from this agenda, and perhaps all over the world. I think this is the comments that I would like to do. Thank you very much. I think you have the
Adeo's microphone, please.
the microphone.
Sorry, my role is to facilitate debate along your presentations, inspiring presentations. So let me kick off the discussion just by asking both of you, first Ida, a question that would give you an opportunity to add some more insights into the European arena. And then I will ask Moritz a question that would give you an opportunity to go deeper as far as the Mexican case is concerned. So let me start with Moritz. In the case of Mexico, what is the major economic challenge you will have to face in order to overcome the crisis? Is this the challenge? Is this ways to increase tax revenue? If yes, which ways? Do you consider a direct taxation or indirect taxation? And Ida, two questions for you. The first, what is the impact on the process of integration of the crisis we are still living in? And aren't you afraid that this can be an opportunity for multi-speed Europe, with the outliers like Hungary and Poland, and countries that are so interested in solving this huge economic and social problem that has been triggered by COVID-19. So could you go slightly deeper into these questions that they are related to what you have already told us? Okay. Ida, probably you will start, please.
Thank you, Tadeusz, for the questions. I mentioned some of the dimensions of integration processes, but the picture is not only pink. What I would add, it is something that you underline, that there is a threat as well seen in the budgetary negotiation that we are just observing, and it comes from not only the current crisis, but maybe it's even more visible right now. And I would say that with regard to multi-speed, we face multi-speed Europe right now. We have several clubs. If you look at integration in the Eurozone, so this is the first example. Some countries voluntarily are in, or they are faced, of course, by the treaties, but some are in, and some are not willing to join the Eurozone. Well, quite soon. So this is the first example that we have this multi-speed, and I would say that I hope that this part in the negotiations, current budgetary negotiation, will be overcome. But if not, so let's have a look on the situation. We have pending budget, pending recovery fund that everybody is waiting for, especially the countries that were hit the most by the crisis. I mean, the countries of Southern Europe again, and some others. And if two countries are blocking right now the situation, so we will not have many friends in the club. And this is quite difficult situation for everybody. We are from Poland, so it's also difficult to us to speak about it. But we see how the countries how countries can react to the current situation, pursuing their own political visions, ideologies, etc. And they are not looking at the more global picture. So I will see the risk in the process of integration by continuing with this more populist way of doing politics. So this is the first issue I wanted to raise apart from the pandemic, because this is like two parallel processes somehow interrelated to each other. And yeah, I just only can hope that we may still use this opportunity that were created in July, for example, when we had the agreement on recovery fund, this additional stimulus to the economies, and we can use them, and we will not be stuck by this provisional budgets for 12 months starting the next year. Maybe just to give the context for the audience from Mexico, we are right now at the end of the financial perspective, and the European money is additional, supportive to what the countries have. And for some countries and for some regions, it's like a very big amount of additional stimulus to and impetus to economic development. So we are just negotiating the next perspective for 2021-27, Yeah, so this is something that the union is right now at the process of negotiating of it. So coming back to a conclusion, I see the chances that I presented in the presentation within this opportunity to go further with this fiscal aspect of integration. But at the same time, we see the risks in the integration process itself that comes from the existing ideologies and views in politics, and these ideologies are expressed by the governments, not necessarily shared by the majority of the societies of the countries. So this is just to conclude this answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Professor Moritz, could you share with us your ideas regarding the strategies to increase the tax revenue, in particular in the case of Mexico? Which ways?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Tadeusz, for your questions. Well, first, I would like to say that independently of whether this recovery is short-lived or sustained, Mexico and other economies in Latin America will face challenges in the future in order to move the ladder of economic development. And one of the key elements to move in this ladder is, as I mentioned, public revenues. Mexico in particular has a major problem with fiscal revenues because they are very poor. They represent about 16% of GDP. So it's below the average of Latin America. And so it needs to increase public revenues somehow. At the end, all the ways leads to Rome. All the ways leads to public revenues because they finance all the strategies that the government can, all the strategies that can use to promote growth and development. They need resources, and if the government doesn't want to increase debt, which we know is eventually a major problem, they need to engineering ways to increase public debt. Well, the first way is probably to, as Mexico has been doing during this administration, is to put in order the ways to increase more without increasing taxes. That is to say that the fiscal authorities need to charge or supervise the ways to that major contributions like enterprises pay their the taxes. So this gives room to increase without increasing taxes the public revenues about 2 percentage points. But this is not enough. The way to increase public revenues is to, like is in the United States or is in Europe, is to impose a fiscal reform that includes a progressive tax revenue in which you increase taxes to the wealthiest, and not only to the wealthiest, but also to the other operations like those in the stock market, for example. I mean, sounds very risky, but there is no alternatives. I mean, these are activities that provide a lot of income to governments that implement them. But obviously, the first way is to increase or modify the tax revenue in a progressive way, in which the wealthiest pay more and redistribute this income to the poorer people, to the poorest people. So I believe there is no magic formula. The formula, we know it, is to increase the taxes to the wealthiest. But this is the way to get a sound government, a government that can stimulate the economy and can resist crisis, so, and can also implement industrial policy. So fiscal policy, fiscal revenues are really, really important. And this is not only the case of Mexico, I would say, as mentioned, it's the case of Latin America. So I think this is the way.
I would like to invite all the participants to ask questions using chat, but while you are writing questions to Ida and to Moritz, let me go back to Moritz and ask a short question. You haven't mentioned indirect taxation in the European context. About 60% of all tax revenue comes from indirect taxation. Don't you see any ways to introduce a universal indirect taxation in order to create a stable source to finance public goods? And then once again, I'm inviting all other participants to ask questions, but the floor is yours now as far as this indirect taxation issue is concerned.
Well, I think this is, let's say, the easiest way to increase public revenues, indirect taxation. But no, it's not necessarily the best way, I believe. Even though it might be a stable source of public revenues, the important source should come from taxing the wealthiest, because the other way is to tax everyone, everyone like the VAT, like a value-added tax, is to tax everyone, poor and rich. And one of the key elements of taxes is to redistribute, is to get income from those who get more and to redistribute to the people that get less, or to finance investment projects, or to finance productivity activities or sectors which create employment and which create value and which create wealth. So, I mean, I will agree that this might be a quick solution, indirect taxation, but in the long term, you cannot escape from a reform that taxes the wealthiest, because if you look at the statistics, most of your income, like in Europe or in rich countries, come from income from the wealthiest. So I think this is the example to follow. No? But I mean, in the short term, if you want to raise more public revenue, it might be a short-run solution.
Thank you very much. I have first questions that have come through the chat option. And the first question is the following. The president of Mexico proposed in the G20 meeting to cancel the debt of countries with low resources. Do you think that proposal will be taken? I think this is a question actually to both of you, because you might have different answers. Who wants to start? Ida, maybe? What are your thoughts about this kind of possibility?
That's always hard to say. The question is just like...
Would you support it?
Sorry?
Would you support this motion to reduce or to cancel the debt of low-income countries?
I would say that it's not only the question to countries with low resources. I think that everybody will face the same in the future, because if we're just observing the level of debt in Europe as well, so we see the increase. And I think that we will have a broader discussion on that. It's not only the case of let's say poorer countries or developing countries, but also we need to rethink how to deal in the future with increase in public expenditure. So I wouldn't say that I would support it or not. I think that we need to discuss among richer and poorer what we should do in the future with this fact that we are just going to have in the nearest years.
Thank you, Ida. And Professor Alberto, this question, and I would add one more, which is directly asked, somebody is asking you. Mexico faced a lost decade in economy and social development. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, well, first, I think the international financial system should help somehow to poor countries to overcome the crisis. One solution is obviously to reduce or to forget the debt to these countries, because the burden that they pay for this interest is very high. So I will think that in order to help these poor countries, the financial system needs to do something, the international financial system. And not only for this, I mean, the international financial system needs to help around the world to overcome growth and development issues. So I think also this is an opportunity to talk about that. So this is something that has been proposed in the past, and this is something that is proposed now. The international financial institutions need to provide support to poor countries. And Mexico has been, on the other hand, has been living not only the last decade 10 years, and have seen poor development, social and economic development, but during the last 40 years, I will say. So during the last 14 years, Mexico has witnessed a decay on social and economic living standards. So that's why perhaps the people decided to change the administration, and we expect them to see a change. But this is true. Mexico has been living in a very bad shape during the last 40 years.
Thank you very much. I have a number of questions, but let me try to give the opportunity to all of you to answer. One question regards what would be the priorities in Mexico as a country dependent on the US? And that would be a question to Alberto. And a question to Ida. It's about the question regards the labor market in the EU and how much it was hit by the lockdowns in different countries. And what was the impact on the labor market? Continuation of a question to you, Ida. What about the impact on the lockdown and the pandemic on the labor market in Poland? So maybe Alberto, you would you would like to start, just a brief comment in the dependence on the US and options that your country and your economy could have.
Thank you. Yeah, Mexico depends strongly on the US economy, like probably most of the world, but Mexico particularly because around 80% of exports goes to that market. This is a blessing and this is a curse at the same time. Now, for example, now United States has implemented a large fiscal stimulus, which have resulted in an increase of growth of around 30% during the last quarter, during the third quarter of this year. And as a result, Mexican exports have increased substantially or importantly. And as a result, Mexico's growth overall has increased, or is expected to increase, or increased in the last quarter of, in the third quarter of this year. So in this sense, it's a bless, because if the United States grows, Mexican export growth as well. But on the other hand, we have several, it's not a good idea to have only one market for exports. But this is the main impression, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ida, lockdowns and the labor market functioning in the EU and in Poland in particular.
Yeah, of course, there is an impact on the labor market as well, and we see the drop in the employment rates, and at the same time, in some regions of Poland, we see the increase in unemployment rates. But we need to wait till the final data is given. However, we see the difference, and we see also the trend that the enterprises are not recruiting people right now, so they are trying. Those who can afford, they are trying to keep their employees in, but it will be not possible to every company to survive on the market. The same is seen in many of the European countries. And I'd like also to make one announcement that we will have another seminar in February that will be only focused on the labor market with the example of Poland and the agglomeration of Poznan city. So I would like to invite everybody to this one with more details on that. But coming back to the question and to the reactions of the EU, I mentioned that we have several instruments. One is this SURE instrument that is to mitigate the unemployment in the countries, and this is based on loans and guarantees to the member states who are requested to work on the work schemes for keeping employment in the countries. And so far, I know that we received 1 billion euro out of 11 that we are just somehow assuming to have. So this is the first instrument. The second one are money under the cohesion policy I mentioned, and there are grants to the companies just to keep going in this pandemic situation. The second issue is some relief in paying taxes or other contributions by the companies again. So this is not just direct aid to households, but rather to companies, and they are in this way helping individuals on the market. So yeah, so I think that's all from me.
Okay. I have a very interesting question regarding universal basic income in Mexico. The question is it possible under the current circumstances, the pandemic, and this question relates not only to the case of Mexico, but to other Latin American countries. Just to summarize, the universal basic income concept as a tool to help the societies and economies to get out of the crisis. This is a question to both of you. Ida, Moritz, who would like to start? Maybe you, Alberto?
Well, thank you. I'm not sure. I think it's a good idea in not to provide some income to everyone, but also at the same time the question is where is the money come from? Will come from? I mean, with these economies taxing poorly and having problems to increase public debt, or not to increase public debt, but to repay it, and eventually. The main question is where the money will come from. And I believe probably that it's a better idea to use that money in productive investments rather than to provide money to all people. So I think it's a very good idea in theory, like the Tobin tax, for example, that taxes capitals, but in practical terms, it might be not feasible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ida, your opinion?
Well, this is indeed interesting because we see some experiments like in Finland, but also in the Northern America with a sort of basic income or money given to people who are homeless even. And it was just experiment in one of the, I think, Canadian provinces that I'm just talking about the homeless people even. So they were given money and their motivation to find home and then job increased after that. So if we are looking from this perspective, more individual one, so it can be a stimulus just to change something. But well, the question that Moritz already mentioned is quite important. Can we afford it as a state just to go with this experiment? I think that we need just to balance our public finance and see if it's possible to do so, or maybe have some like pilot projects, and then we'll see if it works or not, because it seems to be like something that is hot topic in the debates.
Thank you, Ida. I have two questions from Poland to Professor Alberto. The first question regards your statement, your finding that the economy of Mexico should reduce its dependence on the tradable sector. So the question goes, do you think the current pandemic will or should lead to a new wave of trade protectionism and or the accelerated growth or maybe even decline of international trade? Complicated question. And the second question from Poland is to everyone. What is the situation of the poorest groups of the society in Mexico, e.g., marginalized farmers, the producers? Is it worse than before the pandemic? If so, what is the government civil society response? Do they get any support from the government? So please try to cope with those difficult but very important areas of problems.
Thank you. Well, I believe that crises have a positive aspect, and they offer the opportunity to think about what in theory seems to be right. The argument that trade benefits everyone is not necessary, has been debated in the past, and now we must perhaps reflect, think about whether this is necessarily true. We know that in Mexico, our experience with the trade agreements with the United States and Canada have not been as expected, no? Since 1994, when this trade kickoff, trade agreement kickoff, Mexico hasn't really increased the speed of growth. It hasn't really promoted development, and what we have seen is that only a group of exporters, no, have obtained the gains of trade. So the question is whether we should continue this way. No? I mean, trade might be good, but also entails some risk, and it should be assessed. No? It's not a good idea to embark in trade agreements without being prepared. I think the country needs to prepare before going to embark in trade agreements. And this is, Mexico has a real is stuck in trade because they have these trade agreements. But perhaps the idea is somehow to make a trade work for the domestic market. I mean, one of the phenomenons that we have seen in Mexico is premature deindustrialization. And this means that the manufacturing sector has been declined as a share of GDP. And this is a complete catastrophe for a developing economy. So this needs to be reversed. And some way to do that is to try to harness, so to speak, the manufacturing sector to the domestic sector. No? This implies to reduce imports, and this is the task that we should face. I mean, in order
let me add to the flow of your answer another question, which is very much related to it. The question goes in the following way. What kind of measures would you envisage to stimulate the internal market, as you have mentioned, because you've signaled that some kind of protectionist measures could be valuable for the Mexican economy. So let me add a new question to this. What kind of measures would you envisage to stimulate the internal market then?
Well, obviously, one way is to keep wages increasing. You know, this is wages during the last 40 years have been declining or stagnated. So if you want a strong market, you need to have a strong wages so that public can consume. And this, in Mexico, most of the people spend the money on either food or trade services. So the services sector can be think as a kind of engine of growth. After all, wages, consumption, and the service sector are the main engines of growth. So if you want a kind of a strategy in the short term to recover growth, you need to focus on consumption, private consumption, increase wages, and this will lead necessarily to consume services, and services will increase the rate of growth and so on. But the other strategy, I mean, to become a developed country is a long-term strategy, and maybe we need to talk long in that.
Yeah, that would be a topic for the whole seminar.
Yeah.
I have a question to both of you. The question goes in the following way. In Mexico, there is a great number of people working in the informal economy. Are there any special measures to address this problem and to offer to get some helping hand of the government? So the question is to both of you. Ida, what kind of solutions would you see just to solve this problem of informal economy and the ways to integrate those who are functioning in this informal economy into the official official set of activities? How to do it?
Another good question. How to do it?
A new seminar.
Well, because a question refers mainly to Mexico, I think that Moritz would add more. But first of all, maybe I would just concentrate more on the question that is later on coming from Isalia as well. That is a question of impact of COVID on vulnerable groups, because it's somehow interrelated. So I would say that first of all, we have to identify the groups that are affected. If we are looking at the example of schools, we see that some students coming from families with difficulties disappeared from the education system. So this is the first issue, to identify the groups and try to have them back. This is not an easy way to do it, but this is something that I would start with. So just giving this example. Then if we're just looking on the migrants, so we see several ways of how COVID impacted the groups. First of all, is travel restrictions. So this possibility of moving from one country, or even within the countries, when we have different zones between the regions. If we look at the Italian example from spring of this year, or even if we're looking at Poland, what we have this restriction, so it can be difficult for people, for example, who are unemployed, or just to help find a job in another place. So this is just like the first issue, how to do it, and can we provide within this aid I mentioned before, or national resources or regional resources, any kind of schemes or social security system. Can they provide any additional funding for people who are in difficulties? And I would say that this issues related to mobility, to work, to education are the most important, and there are some ideas how to start to do it. But first, we need to identify those who are or can be affected by COVID.
Thank you very much, Ida. Alberto.
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, perhaps the question we have to ask first is what causes informal employment? And there are many theories about that, but in my perception, one of the main causes of informal employment is deindustrialization. You know, because when deindustrialization occurs, particularly of the kind of premature industrialization, what is occurring is that as the manufacturing sector is shrinking, is reducing in terms of value added and in terms of employment, people cannot find job in the main engine of growth, and they have two options when this occurs. I mean, when the main engine of growth, which is the manufacturing sector, declines, growth declines, and the consequence, employment declines, formal employment. So when people trying to find a job, they won't find it. So they have two options, basically. One is to migrate. So that is what we have seen in Mexico. Over 10 million people going to the United States because they can't find a job in Mexico. And the other one is to find a way to live. And this is the informal, via informal activities. So the solution, or I believe that the solution to reduce, because informality exists everywhere, to larger or shorter extent, but the way to go is to industrialize the economy, make the grow the engine of growth, which is the manufacturing sector, which is via industrial policies. In this way, growth will increase and employment will increase. But once again, how would you implement industrial policies? You need funding, so you need fiscal policy. You see, all the ways leads you to Rome.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentations, and then for your answers to questions and comments that have been sent by the participants. We had a long list of questions. I hope I have been able to identify all, if not all, most of them. We have arrived at the point where the time scheduled for our debate has come. So let me once again thank you, the organizers. Thank you Alberto. Thank you, Ida, for your inspiring presentations and sharing with us your thoughts on the impact on COVID-19 on the economy, and also social issues and economic policy challenges. And let me also share with the participants the invitation for the next seminar. Okay. Where is the? I try to. Can you see my sharing? Just a moment. Okay. And now the information on the next seminar. It is to be organized on the 19th of January, and it will be devoted to the impact of COVID-19 on the competitiveness of Mexico and Poland. So let me already invite you to join, all of you, to join this next seminar. Once again, thank you all for your time, for participation. Thank you, the organizers, for this very inspiring evening in Poland and afternoon in Mexico. Thank you very much. Is there anybody who would like to talk right now at the end of our meeting?
Thank you very much for all of you. For your remarks were really interesting to both of you. Thank you. And for the presenter, Tadeusz, dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Thank you for good work.
Thank you very much also. It was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carlos.
So see you in January, on the 19th of January at the next debate seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. And
Bye.
bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.